I was a huge fan of Test Drive Unlimited 1. I put hundreds of hours into this game, and despite its many flaws, it always had me hooked. And after replaying it for a recent video, I was happy to say I still feel the same way. So back in 2011, when Test Drive Unlimited 2 was released, presented as essentially the same game, just better, you'd think I'd have loved it even more, but I didn't. In fact, despite owning TDU2, I barely even remember playing it. I actually remember being actively disappointed by this game. But at 12, I wasn't really old enough to formulate any meaningful reasons as to why, so I thought I'd revisit and give it another chance. Doing this left me both pleasantly surprised and really pissed off. Let's start with the pleasantly surprised bit. TDU2 does so many of the things that TDU did well and does them even better. You can now walk around the dealerships and houses, buy yachts and do interior design, and that just scrapes the surface of the added customization and lifestyle features. TDU2 does an even better job at making the process of upgrading your cars and lifestyle feel real and exciting. Despite aging graphics, the properties here are absolutely fantastic. Even the earlier, smaller properties are a nice and interesting place to be that you can customize to your liking. Get into the later game and you can even buy yourself a yacht, plus with a lower floor garage. This garage features windows which allow you to see out into the ocean while you stare at your car collection. Of course, this is all essentially meaningless, but it's executed so well that it's worth spending the money, as the game slowly turns into Rich Man Simulator 2. In this area in particular, TDU2 did exactly what it was meant to do. Took a great aspect of TDU1 and made it better. Character customization has also been vastly improved, with more branded clothing options, a plastic surgeon, and a choice of haircuts. Rediscovering all these things had me genuinely excited. Perhaps I unfairly dismissed this game as a child. That's when I began to realise I wasn't really having as much fun as I did with the previous TDU. One of the reasons for this becomes immediately obvious as soon as you start playing the game, but the other reasons took me hours and hours to really figure out. Less immediately obvious is the game's overall atmosphere. Test Drive 1 has far better music and menu sounds in my opinion, but this could quite easily be a bit of nostalgia bias. But it's not just menu music that gives TDU its charm. This will be an entirely subjective point, as are most in this video, but TDU1 may have technically worse graphics, but they look so much nicer. The colour palette is nicer and fits the vibe of the game more. TDU2 feels a little dark and washed out at times. This is partially due to the new day, night and weather cycle. A nice addition to add some variety, but it feels like it interrupts that weird, outer-worldly perfect vibe that TDU1 gave. You'll find yourself driving in grey and dark conditions very often, which of course, this may be more realistic, but TDU was never really a game that relied on strict realism to feel good. More isn't always better, and some of the best games from this generation came with no day-night cycles. The great advantage about having no day-night cycles, like Need for Speed Underground or Most Wanted, is that it allows the developers to completely tailor the world to one style and colour palette. On paper, it looks like TDU2 is head and shoulders above games like Most Wanted with no day-night cycles, but in reality, I think it actually deducts from the overall experience in certain instances. I can absolutely see why they did it, and it's in no way badly implemented, but I do think this is worth commenting on. Another unfortunate example of this less is more problem TDU2 has is its introduction of narrative and character depth. There's countless reviews already covering this, so I don't want to dwell on them too much, but in short, they are terrible.
Good luck. I couldn't have done it without you. Thank you, Marco.
They feel even more odd and corporate than the characters in modern racing games. Mix that with slightly unnerving character models, and they just feel like they weren't at all needed. They make the game feel a little bit less grown up than its predecessor, but all in the wrong ways. Test Drive is meant to feel like a sort of overly clean, surreal, but chill, rich person fantasy. But the overly loud and bubbly characters of TDU2 feel like a completely unwelcome addition and really chip away at the great atmosphere we expected from the first game. Take the cheesy characters out and keep the different race categories and the game would be much better for it. All of this I could forgive, as I forgave many of TDU1's shortcomings, if it wasn't for the driving physics. Let me start this rant off by saying the physics in TDU1 are also not great. And to be honest, TDU2's physics are relatively similar. But TDU2 took TDU1's physics and said, let's do the same again, but make it slightly worse. Cars have this odd feeling of being on rails until they begin to lose traction, and it's almost always unrecoverable, and this happens at times that rarely ever make any sense. Each car feels relatively good at very, very low speed. They oversteer on throttle and behave as expected for the most part, but as soon as you begin to gain traction and pick up speed, All cars have this odd thing where they go from the rear differential being locked to completely opening for no reason. This happens in every rear-wheel drive car I drove in the game, limited slip differential or not. I also noticed that one of the only ways to recover a car that's beginning to oversteer is to brake hard. Anyone who's ever done any track time, hard driving or sim driving knows that this just doesn't work in the real world. This ends up shifting more of the car's weight forward, taking grip away from the rear tyres. I'm by no means saying that TDU2 needs to be more realistic to be better. There's plenty of arcade racing games that have very unrealistic physics that work perfectly well, but they need to be intuitive and work with the user, and they don't. The further you get throughout the game, the better it gets, and the higher end cars that should be more of a handful are actually surprisingly easy to drive. But with all the practice in the world, it's never quite good enough. This is something that for me almost kills the game entirely. It's just bad enough that you never really feel in control of your car. Every corner feels like you just about got round it, and there was more luck involved than skill. This was also part of TDU1, but it's definitely worse here. Not to mention, the TDU2 map, much like TDU1, is huge, and pretty barren in a lot of areas. A big but barren map is usually a point of criticism, but it could work well here. It's just so much bigger than your average racing game map that it's understandable that a lot of the roads just feel empty. It's common to have to cover north of 25 miles to get to your next objective, especially when you start out. And honestly, this would be great fun if the driving physics weren't so bad. The game does so well to immerse you in the feeling of purchasing and owning a car that you've always wanted. It honestly wouldn't feel all that boring or out of place to have to cover massive amounts of ground in these cars if the handling model was good. You'd want to the same way you would in real life. But in TDU2, it really feels like a task, because the physics model crosses the line of too bad that you just don't feel at all connected to the car you're driving. And that's a massive shame. This game has so much going for it, and I would still argue it is indeed a good game. Buying your house and arranging your cars, looking at new properties and walking around dealerships feels textbook test drive, and the game is untouchable even when compared to TDU1 in these areas. But for me, the physics are just a little too painful to look past when you consider how much ground the game demands you to cover just to make any progress. A large portion of Test Drive Unlimited 1's fun came from the exploration, and this is definitely hindered when you spend half of your time upside down in a hedge. Yes, the physics do get better with practice, but they never get good or even really average. Mix that with something far more subjective and less tangible, the vibe, and for me, TDU is still a measurably better experience than TDU2. Ultimately, games are all about how they make you feel, and while TDU1 is technically a worse game in many respects, it pulls off a vibe that no one has managed to replicate since, not even its own creators. That being said, if you haven't played Test Drive Unlimited 2, I would still highly recommend it. It has so many moments that are so great, it's just hugely frustrating that a few minor oversights really hold it back.